So I recall on several occasions when I thought I had the flu. I went to the GP and he looked down my throat, listened to my chest, prescribed some antibiotics. I was miserable for a few days, but, within a week or so, I was better. And then one day I did get the flu, and it really knocked me about. I couldn't move for days. It was a horrible experience, and needless to say, I've had my flu shots this winter. But it got me thinking more about the flu. Since it seems to be a very bad flu season this year, I wanted to know more about how we can better handle this epidemic, how technology can help us, and what should individuals do if they get the symptoms. After all, flu can be deadly. To help us today, we're very fortunate to have on the line Professor Bill Rawlinson, Senior Medical Virologist and Director of Serology of the Serology and Virology Lab at New South Wales Health Pathology, Randwick. So welcome, Professor Rawlinson, and many thanks indeed for participating in this podcast.
That's a pleasure.
Your knowledge, what's the typical death rate and what would you expect from this year?
Death from influenza occurs typically in the older age group or those who are at risk of more severe disease. And each year we see somewhere between about 2,500 and 4,000 Australians die as a result of influenza. So we could expect that again this year. And if it's a worse season, then we may see more death.
Wow. So this makes it, a really serious healthcare condition that we need to be paying a lot of attention to, right?
Yes, and one of the other big things about influenza is that the fact that it's a virus and we have not only vaccines for it, which are safe and effective, but we also have antiviral drugs, which you need to start within 48 hours of getting the flu. Those two things mean that recognising the flu and diagnosing it is extremely important, particularly in a year like this year when we've had more cases.
I'm aware that there are some flu tests that you can perform, and these can be performed, in the community or nearer the patient, in hospital emergency rooms. How effective are these in helping manage influenza?
So influenza is important to diagnose. You made the point at the very start about the difference between a cold where you can sort of soldier on and influenza where in the morning you're well and by the afternoon you can't get out of bed. They're very different diseases. And so clinically we do recognise it. However, even in season when there's peak activity, we get it wrong about 2 out of 5 times, maybe 1 out of 5 times. And outside of season, so what we've seen since sort of January of this year, we probably get it wrong about 4 out of 5 times. So when peak season is around, recognition of what we call influenza-like illness clinically is pretty good. However, making a laboratory diagnosis is important. The tests we have available now are often multiplex, so they're often molecular tests based upon PCR, and in a laboratory such as ours, that'll detect up to about 20 or 30 different types of respiratory viruses, including influenza A, B, and it will subtype those as well. In some cases, it will give us information about resistance to antivirals. As you say, there are rapid tests available or near patient tests. They take about half to 1 hour of the actual test. There's a little bit of time either side in terms of resulting. But exactly what you say, it means that people can get a result immediately. New South Wales Health Pathology rolled out last year a series of rapid tests which are performed in laboratories like ours, a reference laboratory, and that allows us to do the test sort of outside of hours or at 2 a.m. in the morning when it may be important to recognise in emergency whether somebody needs to be isolated, treated for influenza or something else. They can also be used in remote sites, and certainly in influenza as well as in other infections, they're starting to be used in remote sites, and they're proving to be almost as accurate, and in some cases as accurate, as the tests that we perform in the laboratory. One of the big downsides so far has been they've only been for flu, so you get a flu yes or no, but you don't get another answer. But even that's improving. There are now multiplexed rapid tests which take, say, half to 1.5 hours and provide somewhere between 5 and 15 diagnostic answers. So they not only tell you have flu, but if you don't have flu, they'll tell you what you do have. You may have a rhinovirus or an adenovirus or something else. In most cases, that's reassuring because it tells you why you've got symptoms. You're still infectious, but it's not influenza.
Wow. That's incredibly helpful, I'm sure, Professor Rawlinson. So, look, we're out of time now. I just wanted to summarise then what I've learned today, that it's important, if you believe you have the flu symptoms, to manage correctly, to try and avoid the at-risk groups, to cough into your elbow, to isolate yourself somewhat, to get to the doctor and maybe even have a flu test, and if possible get onto the appropriate therapies early. And if not, to get home and take a Panadol and put yourself to bed and just manage your way through it. So it's been very helpful for me. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you joining us today and sharing some of your expertise and knowledge. Thanks very much. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to this edition of It's in Our Blood. Look out for further topics in this series or go to pathologytechnology.org.au. This podcast is produced by London Agency, Melbourne, Australia.